Welcome back to another episode of Beekeeping Buddies. I'm Steven.
And I'm Luke.
We're going to talk some more about beekeeping today. And I think toward the end of the show, instead of talking about our droning on segment, we're going to talk about sort of a deep dive into the cutouts we do. We've had some requests to cover cutouts, so we're going to make all you listeners, if you're interested in that, hang around to the very end. And if you're not, then you'll know when you can dive off to something else. We're working around the yard as we normally are. We still have some weather to work around the yard.
We have fantastic weather right now. Not just weather.
It is.
It is past October 15th. That is past our frost date. We have warm.
We still had 80 degrees.
We still have 80. And next week, we still have 80 degrees.
I saw upper 70s, but yeah, close enough probably.
Yeah, I'm rounding that up. 78 and rounding up to 80.
So the disappointing thing, though, is super dry. Like, we haven't had hardly any rain. I looked at it today because we had thunder and then just a whiff of rain that amounted to about 1/10 of an inch at my house, which was not enough to make the area underneath the tree that still had leaves wet.
Yeah. Same in my place. It rained. It made the pavement wet.
Yep.
And that's about it.
And then the sun came out, and I checked the weather station, and we had 3/10 for the 3 weeks of October. So it's been super dry.
Which means in September, I think we had 1/10.
Yep.
So we've had 4/10 in 2 months.
In 2 months, which means everybody's harvesting here in the Midwest. All the crops are coming in. All the crops are air dried. Everybody's loving that because they don't have to run their expensive dryers, soybean, and corn dryers. But at the same time, that means that all of our fall forage has dried up.
Yeah, it's been gone for, I think, a while.
Yeah.
And they're hitting the flower gardens. So,
Yep.
again, another important reason to have a little pollinator habitat at your place that hopefully you're watering. But if you're not, it's probably not producing anything right now.
So I'm doing 2-to-1. I'm feeding 2-to-1 right now. We had a couple cutouts this past couple of weeks. Three in fall here, and so I moved those to a hive and been doing my best to put some weight on them. We actually pulled out quite a bit of honey out of those hives, and so I fed most of that back to them, specifically just putting an extra box on top of the hive and then putting the...
Did most of them stick around? So we switch off when we do cutouts. Steve grabs some of them. Usually it's whoever wants the bees, right? We don't really have...
These were surprisingly broodless for a number of reasons, and so without the brood, it's basically a lot of honey, and then because it's fall, all of our buckets of comb and honey were just covered in robbers.
Yeah.
And that's logistically difficult for you and your SUV.
It is. It gets pretty... It can
lively.
get exciting. Yeah. I'm actually pretty calm with them flying around, but
Yeah.
I've had people in the passenger seat with me before while I've had that situation going on, and they're just not as calm. I don't understand why they're not calm when bees flying bouncing off the windshield.
We stopped on the way home from one and picked up some lunch, and the people that I parked next to came out of the restaurant and got 3/4 of the way to their car and noticed the number of bees flying around in the back of my truck, and then had this look like, well, now what I'm supposed to do? And I'm like, relax, lady, just get in your car and leave. They're not going to bother you.
Yeah.
So that can be a thing, especially in fall when there's heavy robbing like there is. It's like we open up a hive, and there's only a handful of flyers for the hive, and by the time we leave, there's a cloud around the scaffold because of all the robbers.
Yeah, literally a cloud. Like
Yeah.
you can see them coming and going. It's just it's pretty interesting.
And it's always a challenge. Like in the spring, you don't have that, and like you can get done with a cutout, and like there's nothing left. There's just a handful of flyers, 3 or 4, 10 or 15. So it's easy to bring the homeowner out. Okay, you're done. Nobody's around. There'll be a couple of stragglers. They'll fly off in a day, right? And then you bring somebody out for a fall one, and like there's a cloud of bees covering the side of the building that they haven't seen. Like there wasn't that much activity when there was a hive there. I thought you said they're still going to make this better. And I'm like, well, you got to understand.
Give it a couple days.
Yeah. We also had some club elections for our local club.
Oh
yeah. Neither of us managed to avoid being reelected.
No, I actually changed roles. I'm in communications now. I think that's a better role for me than social director. Our communications guy was doing fine, but
In the modern day, it really helps to have if a club wants to be keeping up with the times and trying to attract members that are going to be active. Those are as our Gen Xers and older get older, we have to fill in with the younger generations, and those generations don't communicate and have different forms of interaction than the old days.
There's a technological gap.
So being able to ensure that your club is keeping up with the times is going to ensure your club continues to be a thing in your area. So along those lines, I think, you're probably going to be a better choice there for making sure that our members are staying informed about what's going on.
Yeah, and then Steve got reelected as apiary manager.
Yeah, I had split it last year with one of the other members who wanted to, I was willing to let somebody else take the reins and see if they wanted to do. And the unfortunate thing was they weren't real big about doing the community engagement part, basically having the hive openings, and which I feel passionate about in terms of ensuring that we have sort of mentor light for new beginners.
Yeah,
in the
so
club.
talk about what that is. When you say community engagement, what are you doing out there?
Well, the club apiary, we allow any of the club members to set hives in the two club apiaries we have. The one that's closest to me is one of the original apiary locations, and it's been since I've been active in the club, it's been my goal to use that as a teaching tool for new beginners. So, part of beekeeping it's learning through experience, right? You can read all the books you want, you can read all the forums you want, you can watch the YouTube videos, but until you're standing over the hive, looking at the bees yourself, you need the experience of looking at the bees and handling bees to sort of understand hive behavior and understanding hive behavior is sort of a key part of beekeeping.
Well, and as hobbies go, I don't think that's unique, but as hobbies go, it is more extreme in beekeeping than other hobbies that I've seen.
Sure.
That because being stung does hurt, and because the bees, there is a fundamental response of bees humming at you, buzzing at you, but flying in your face that is not is not in other hobbies, and it can be scary. It's off-putting.
It can be, and it's one of those hobbies that has a very high initial startup cost. So, in terms of you think this is something you're going to want to do, and then you drop $500 or $800 on it, and then realize, a month in that you just don't have. This is not the thing for you. The unfortunate thing is you've already got bees, you've already got invested in the equipment, and now what are you going to do? You're just going to let them flounder, which unfortunately we know plenty of beginners that are on that path, and so our goal is to be, hey, you don't have bees yet, you can come out and we'll lend you a suit, and you can stand around and watch, or I'll hand you a frame of bees, you can dive right in, right? Yeah. And so that opportunity to go through hives and be hands-on with bees and see other hives that aren't your own, especially overwintered hives. If you're a beginner, that 3-pound package that you just installed last week is going to behave entirely different than an overwintered hive of 2 deeps and maybe a medium by the time it's middle of April.
Absolutely.
So that it's an opportunity to teach and learn, which I think is important. And so I had that as a key role that I had done. I'd take time on Saturday mornings after our club meetings to go out there and have a club opening and go through hives. And I think the other member was moving on with he was going to be busy with other parts of his life, or, as our hobbies change and our interests change and our lives get busy with other things, and he wanted to move away from that. And so I stepped up to basically run it all again, which,
I think it was a good role for you too.
Yeah.
It's interesting. I actually so I do honey tastings, and I had one this Sunday for 18 people, which is that's a larger group.
That's a pretty good group.
It's a pretty good group. And we actually talked about the apiary.
Yeah.
I had some interest from that group, and I told them, you got to look at this. You got to look at our website, which is hoibes.org, I believe is our website.
Yeah, hoibes.org.
hoibes.org, and that you'd be doing them in the next year, doing the hive openings.
Yep.
And they should join the club if they want to. I think it's really reasonable. I think our rate's $20 for the year.
Yep.
And I told them about the drone migration that happens during that you can, if you're standing on the bluff, I think you and I talked about it, that you can see some of the drone migration, or not, I guess a migration, drone flying patterns.
Yeah.
And and that if they ever wanted to see something, that's really hard to see, even in my apiary where I've got a lot of bees. It's very difficult to see unless you're up at an altitude, right?
Right.
So they thought that was fascinating.
Because we moved. That was one of the things that one of the previous member helped us do, was get the apiary relocated on the property that we have an agreement on, and so now we set up on top of a levee, and so the levee is probably 20 feet on one side, and 25 or 30 feet down to the creek on the other side. So you're kind of up in the trees.
Yeah.
In terms of the.
So you're right at their flying level
Yeah.
when they go out and fly. It's pretty neat.
So we had the club elections, and we've been feeding around the yard.
Yeah, I'm gonna get ready for OA treatments. Now our hives are mostly broodless. They should be winding down this time of year.
And you were doing some combines.
Yep, and I did some combines today. Combinations. I put we had talked about the queen castles I had.
Yep.
Those queen castles, 3 frames each, and I combined that into a single Palmer nuke. So for those that don't know, Palmer nuke's basically a hive that's divided in 2. So there's 4 frames on one side, 4 frames on the other, and you can add boxes to the top of those at 4 frames at a time. And those really, for me, do pretty well over winter. The bees really like chimney up, and they do really well in that chimneying up process. So I had 9 frames, actually very full of bees. I was surprised at how many bees were there. I almost felt bad doing it because there's going to be a queen. Out of those 3 hives, there's only going to be 1 queen that survives.
Well, and we talked last episode. We talked about how we felt like there was certainly something about how the more compact, the crowded hives seem to actually respond better and seem to do better overall.
Yeah, if you especially as we approach fall.
Yeah.
Right. And in fact, that's what I see too. For years, I've had left some supers on top of hives and left some without. And the ones that I take the supers off, almost always do better. So these nine frames are almost, I would say that they're 75% honey on each of those. So they're gonna have a ton of honey. They have a really good population. They are going to kill one of those queens or 2 of those queens, so they're down to 1. But I'm really interested. I marked it in my notes. I'm interested in how they'll do going through winter. I have high hopes for them. The hive that's right next to them has one of the biggest queens I've ever seen in my life. She's almost, I should have measured it. I bet she's almost 1.5 inches long. She's huge. So
and those are marked with color?
Those are not marked. Those are this year. Those are all this year's queens. They are fall. Late, they were July queens.
Yeah, but so
I didn't go through and mark them.
You didn't paint them?
I didn't paint them. I didn't take the time to paint them. I was trying to do a bunch of things today, and I was working on some social media for Dad too, and I just didn't get to it. So OA treatments are something that they're probably excessive, right, at this point, but with no brood, they should have a really good kill count for mites going forward. And I have the stuff to make the glycol and oxalic acid mixture, which I was going to do this year, but I think I'll certainly do it next year, so that I can do the Swedish sponges.
Yeah. So in the news segment, my mom, Dad. I think this started with Dad. He would cut out. They're still paper magazine or paper. Newspaper aficionados.
That's what those are called.
Dead tree paper
Yep.
people. And so once a month, maybe once every couple of months, I get a literally scissored out section of newspaper that's been stapled together, and my mom sends it up. Dad would always do it with articles, and Mom continues to do it. And this is an article from the New York Times from several weeks ago, talking about South Korean beekeeping right along the DMZ, which is the demilitarized zone, which is the zone that separates northern South Korea and southern North Korea, their quote unquote border, and it's the border between the two countries there. And in case a little geography lesson, it's like a 6 mile wide section of uninhabited ground that's heavily landmined and barbed wired,
razor wire.
Yeah, to keep a separation between the two countries.
And overgrown, is from my understanding.
Yeah, it's not inhabited, right? So they intentionally have an agreement that is not to be inhabited by either side in that area. And so this guy his property basically is adjacent to that DMZ zone, and he keeps a bunch of bees there. And I guess because of the wild nature of the habitat, in a sort of a tropical portion of the world, then that's a very wild part of the Korean peninsula there. And because of that, it generates pretty good bee activity because of all the available flowers and things.
Yeah. He said, what, 200 and almost 300 gallons of honey?
Yeah, he harvests, and I guess he was working it through a local market, trying to sell.
Working it through a bar.
Yeah, through a local retail. Yeah.
And they were selling it in mixed in drinks, and they dropped him because it was too expensive. I was surprised at the money he was getting for it. I was surprised for two things. One, his cost per pint.
Yeah, he says he's packaged glass bottles just over a pint that retail for $33. So we're going to assume that the New York Times has done a Korean, is it won?
I don't know. Translation. I
to U.S. dollars correctly, and that number is correct. Because if it's 2 pints to a quart, then that's like $66 a quart. And then we did some quick Googling. Economically, there's sort of a quick and dirty way to determine how your money stacks up to another country's money. Is it more expensive to live there or less expensive to live there? And that informally is known as the Big Mac Index, where they track the price of Big Macs all throughout the world. This is McDonald's Big Macs. The idea being that if you live in a more expensive country, your labor's more expensive, your ingredients are more expensive, your land is more expensive, then your Big Mac should be more expensive. And if all things else being equal, you can look at what you charge for a Big Mac in one country versus what you charge in a Big Mac for another country, and you can get an idea of whether or not how your currency stacks up to another currency in terms of, are you more expensive or less expensive to live there? And per the Big Mac Index, it looks like it's a little about 1.5, about 3/4 cheaper to live in Korea than it is in the U.S., which would mean they're getting even a higher premium for the honey than what we would get, than what either you or me are selling our honey for. So.
Right. So he's probably charging quite a bit. He also mentions that his losses are pretty high because it's so cold. I wonder what his mite treatments are. But another interesting thing was the hive types.
So there's a photo of his apiary here, and it's like most apiaries you see. It looks like a commercial setup. He's running 2 hives per pallet, and he's got probably 30 or 40 pallets laid out in the yard, just like a commercial guy would. But we recognize the hardware, the woodenware, and by woodenware we mean styrofoam. They are the same styrofoam. I call them the finning hives because they say finning on the side.
Yeah, finning stamped into the side of them.
And from what I can tell, both of us have looked at this. They are the same styrofoam hives that they're using there. So, in terms of, I think we talked about it earlier in the year, the Langstroth, hive size and shape, and how that spread throughout the world. It's not just a U.S. thing, right? It's used pretty universally across the world in terms of all beekeeping.
Europe, England doesn't use the Langstroth. They use a variety of it, and Japan doesn't use anything even close to it. Japan uses an empty box, but Europe has a smaller hive. They call them like the imperial hive or something like that.
Yeah.
There is a beekeeper that I listen to, his podcast, that has switched over to the Langstroth because he likes it better. It gives you more leeway.
I thought you were saying that Japan uses the Langstroth in their heavy producing hives.
They use the Langstroth. So the ones I saw, they use the Langstroth in the Apis mellifera hives.
Yeah.
And those are not the traditional Japanese. And then in the Apis cerana hives, which is the Japanese honeybee, Apis cerana japonica, they use like an empty box hive with comb, and you cut your comb out.
Yeah.
That I've seen. Now,
it's kind of like a ware hive, I guess, right?
Kind of, yeah. The Apis cerana are much more apt to swarm.
Yeah.
So it's just a different way of doing it. And then in Cuba, they have another hive type that is, because those are totally different honeybees. The stingless ones, Apis melliponas, and those make cups. And so that's also kind of an open box. They don't actually make cells on the side. They make cups, and they fill the cups with honey.
Speaking of other bees, did you happen to catch 628 Dirt Rooster's bumblebee cutout?
No, I haven't seen it yet. I got notified of it, but I haven't stopped to take a look at it.
Super interesting. A couple of reasons. One, apparently they can be even more defensive and territorial than the honeybees.
Yes.
And because they don't lose their stingers, they will just repeatedly sting you. And so because of that, he really doesn't. He was all suited up and not looking forward to it, and took a break. And
so I did a cutout this year for bumblebees.
No,
I didn't. Yeah, I did it during the middle of the summer. It was a bumblebee nest. They swear it was a bumblebee nest. It fell out of a tree. It was an old squirrel nest.
So these were in the ground.
Yeah. So this was out of a tree. It was an old squirrel nest. And as soon as I walked up to it, they were. I stood it up because I didn't know what to expect. As soon as I got close to it, they were unhappy that I was there. And I put them into a one of those brown portable hives, the little plastic ones.
Yeah, the Pro Nukes.
The Pro Nuke.
Yep.
I threw it in a Pro Nuke. I moved it out into the woods. They did fine.
So he stuck the BVAC at their entrance and just sucked them up as they came out.
Oh.
And
he probably had a lot more. I only had like 20.
This was several hundred probably.
Okay.
And then carefully removed the debris that's sort of like a wood pile almost of like construction material that was rotten down in the back of some woods, and dug down to the bottom of it. And then it had this sort of weird cups and round egg sack looking things.
Interesting.
And so he just kind of gently scooped all that up and put it in a one of his corrugated nuke boxes. The sort of disposable plastic corrugated nuke boxes you can get.
Yeah.
The
cardboard ones.
Yeah, the cardboard one. Well, this is the Plasticell ones, but
okay, sure.
The stuff like the political signs and stuff used to be made out of and stuff.
Yeah.
So scooped it up, put it in that, and then just set that in the back corner of a yard and dumped the bumblebees on top of the inside the box. And I guess they're just gonna. He's like, well, I got to let the wife know because there's no mowing back there now. So just
we'll throw a link in the chat. To link that video.
In case you want to see how the bumblebees work, not that, and that'd be a good segue for doing cutouts because you were also called out for a potential cutout today that you went by and looked at and was in fact
Eastern yellow jacket.
And not
honeybees.
Not honeybees.
No. So we've been asked to talk about cutouts, and realistically, some of the things that is really difficult to find information on, in my experience, and I think Steve will agree here, is cutouts and pollination services. Like how they work, how much it costs, all that stuff is well guarded by a number of people. It's just, and it doesn't make a lot of sense to me. So,
I mean, I guess maybe pollination services, if you're trying to compete in an area that had a good demand for that, and you want to keep sort of your pricing close to the chest because you're looking at competitive reasons for that. But in terms of cutouts, like, you want to move into my area and start doing cutouts, I give them all to you, bud.
Yeah, they're not pleasant, but we are going to talk about them. They are probably, it depends on the cutout. The ones that are chest height or above our head, those don't bother me so bad. When I'm afraid of heights, and when I have to stand on 2 layers of scaffolding, like the last 4 we did actually.
Yeah.
Those are not my cup of tea. I'll do it. I'll get up there.
So far we've averaged half of them have been inside of a house in an 8-foot ceiling, which means you're either doing it off a ladder. We're pretty tall guys. I'm 6 foot, and you're what, 6'2"?
Yeah.
And so because of that, on a typical 8-foot ceiling, they make a thing called a drywall walk plank or drywall walk stand, which is sort of a 2-foot tall bench. They make some that are slightly taller. And this gives you like a 3-foot platform that's 2 foot off the ground, which makes a good height to get you
I can
head up at the ceiling, but like not hunched over, and still, and then you can still reach up into the ceiling to do the cutout. So
sure.
We use that a lot. If it's over 8 feet, then we've used our step ladder and a scaffold plank inside to be above the 2-foot height.
Yep. Steve's got the scaffolding. I just don't have that.
So we'll cover some equipment here. We can get into the pricing at the end. But if you're wanting to do bee cutouts, first of all, you're gonna need to be an experienced beekeeper who's used to being around bees,
and because who can recognize what's going on in the hive, because you can get into a hive that's been poisoned, and they don't tell you, because very rarely in any of our calls does anybody actually tell you the truth until they're really comfortable with you. Like when you say, "Hey, have these been poisoned?" No, they haven't been poisoned. And we have to talk to them for a while, and then they say, "Oh yeah, by the way, I emptied a whole can of wasp spray at the entrance."
Yeah.
Right?
So the communication there, right, is always a question of, are they understanding what your question is, and are they willing to communicate? What does it mean to them is actually what it means to you, right? So there's sort of always that back and forth, and so it's also one of those things where you can't get, well, clearly you can, because we've run into these, but we would highly recommend, it would be frowned upon if you were to start a cutout and then get overwhelmed and pack up and leave halfway through the job. That's really unprofessional.
Well, and it's because people don't realize. So in your hives, when things get spicy, I've done it. You can get up and walk away.
You get up and walk away. Put the lid on and come back in 5 minutes or 10 minutes, and
they'll be calmed down.
But like once you start to cut out, I know if you watch 628, you watch some of Randy's videos, he does talk about having to split a big cutout over a day, but he's coming back. He's going to finish the job.
Yeah.
But for a lot of these, it's going to get spicy. You're going to get stung. Like the average, I get stung. I usually do the open. I've got more the DIY contracting background, which is why we partner well together. Luke does really well at the managing people. Like that's the other thing about, it. If you're going to do it on a ones and twosy, that's fine as a beekeeper. But the reality is, if you're going to do more than that, it's almost like a business. And Randy, the guy on 628 Dirt Rooster, he works with a partner. He usually has a partner with him. We would really recommend that this be a 2-person job.
Yep.
Especially when you've got heights involved, you got to have a ground man. Otherwise, you're going to be wearing yourself out super quick up and down the ladder a million times. And, when you're picking that partner, you're picking that person you're working with, Beekeeping Buddies, it's going to be somebody that needs, like, it's always the classic, pick somebody, if you're not good at doing X, Y, and Z, don't pick somebody who's exactly like you, and now you've got 2 of you in the situation, and neither of you are good at it. You got to find that partner
I
that.
actually like talking to people and going and discussing what's going on with them because they're really uncomfortable, and I like taking that discomfort away, and I'm decently good at that. Steve's really good at the construction. Like he says, he's got DIY background, but he's very good at construction, and he does a really good job of that. And I don't have that skill
I
set.
would prefer not to have to deal with the customer.
Yeah, and I don't mind the 10 callbacks that you're going to get as part of this, and telling them telling them, hey, this is not a big deal, and this is why it's not a big deal, and making sure they understand that and making that comfortable. So
and so while I'm up doing cutout, he could be taking and handing off honeycomb to the customer, and which is always a nice, value add in terms of the experience for them, and value add for the business in terms of what they feel like, are they getting value out of what we're doing? Because that's the other thing is, as we'll get to the end when we're talking about prices, it's universally understood. Universally, everybody thinks it's too expensive, right?
yeah,
and so you find that partner you're working with that complements, the parts of this job that you're going to have to do. And so I bring to it a lot of equipment that I had previously. I had acquired some baker scaffold, so we've been using my bakered scaffold on the outside. I have normal 5-foot construction scaffold, which you could use. The problem with 5-foot scaffold is 2 sections, it'll give you 10 feet, but if you need to get the second story, now you need a third section for 15 feet, right? So you need to be if you want to be head height at, 12 feet off the ground, 16 feet off the ground, that's a little hard with just 10-foot scaffold. So the baker scaffold is more like 6 foot, so I can get 12 foot off the ground, and that puts your head height a little higher than that. I can attest to the fact that you get at the top of that double stack baker scaffold, and it's a little sketchy up there. We reinforced our last one with some cross bracing.
that was much better.
It was better, but it needs to be leveled up. Safety first, safety third, all that kind of stuff. But the point is, I'm bringing 2 sections of baker scaffold. I'm bringing a
skill saw, a vibratory saw. Wait, it's not called a vibratory saw.
It's a multi-tool, a vibratory multi-tool, a multi-saw. It's the little. It's got the little blade that wiggles back and forth at like a high speed.
It's great at drywall. It's great at small areas.
Well, it's the plunge. You can do the plunge cut, right?
Yeah.
And then we did one on the side of a house. He was already redoing the siding, and it was just blackboard. Well, it was old masonite siding, and so I just plunge cut that with my circular saw because it was super quick.
Yeah.
But I'm bringing a folding ladder. The multi-purpose folding ladder that'll do a step ladder, or you can set it up as a quote unquote extension ladder. Yep. So we use that to get up on top of the baker scaffold. We can also use it set up for like an 8-foot step ladder inside a house. So that's a multi-use ladder, scaffold plank. I got 2 sections of baker scaffold. I'm bringing multiple cordless tools. You bought the everything BVAC.
Yeah.
And that's like a $500 investment.
Yeah.
You have to have a BVAC.
Yeah. We used to use one that you put together.
Yeah. When I first started it, I had done I didn't want to spend the $500 because it was not something that I thought I wanted to do a lot of, right. And so I wanted to just take an existing 10-frame box and put a screen on the top and bottom, suck them up, throw some frames in the box, and then suck them into the box, and then just bring it back to the yard and just set the box in my apiary and be done, and not have to unload them, because a lot of them were like a variation of a shop vac, like a 5-gallon bucket vac or something like that.
Yeah, you plug into the vacuum side of it.
And you always had to dump that out, and the dumping out part can be exciting. Yeah. And so my thought was, well, if I can just get them all in the box that I'm going to house them in, I could just take that off as a unit and set that aside, and that could be the box they live in.
Right.
And we used that for the first couple of years.
I still have one. I still have it just in case things go weird.
The benefit to that was you can just use a regular shop vac, and then we used a 6-foot hose from the shop vac to that box, so you could sort of remote mount that box closer to you, leave the shop vac on the ground, and then use a longer shop vac hose from that box up to wherever you're working. So that worked well that way, and then there was a vacuum control on the box that houses the bees, and prevents them from being sucked into the shop vac. The Everything Bee Vac, we picked that one up from Randy. He had the contact down south for the guy who makes those. It's a portable version, battery operated. The idea is that you could throw it on your back and climb up a ladder. I don't know how much you'd actually want to do that. I don't know that I've seen ever seen anybody actually do that on YouTube.
So I picked it up and did that once.
Yeah.
And maybe if you flipped it around, because it's so top heavy.
Super top heavy.
So maybe if you flipped it around and wore it that way, but I think it falls out. So I don't know. It's okay for having handles for, if you're 15 feet up and you need to bring it up a ladder. It's great for that. But I wouldn't wear it.
I have a couple of shortcomings with it. The hose on it seems to be...
It's a little short.
Just short enough to be irritating. We've been making it work, but you have to have it up on the scaffold with you. And you really need to have it close at your feet in order to reach.
Usually we put it on top of another bucket that we've got up there.
That gives you enough height. We have definitely had to put it on top of the stepladder in a house, put it on top of the stepladder that is set up as 6-foot configuration while we're standing on the drywall stilts. And then it has an integrated battery that's rechargeable. However, we found that even on a full charge, it's only running for about 6 hours. Yeah. 4 to 6 hours.
Yeah, I would say probably 6. And 6 hours, by the time you set up, from when you start and get going to when you need to get it back home, it's going to be dead.
Well, and that's the thing is we made the mistake early that we shut it off and not understanding that the bees will quickly overheat in it. And
extremely quickly.
We lost a significant portion of the bees out of one cutout because of that. And we reached out to Randy and the guy who makes it, and they're like, oh, yeah, you really need to let that run on low to make sure it still has airflow over the bees to keep them cool. So really, once you start vacuuming bees, it needs to be on until you're dumping bees out of the bucket.
Yeah. Now, we had one where we had to unscrew. So imagine a bucket. So it's a 5-gallon bucket that has a screen that fits into the top of it. And then on top of that screen, the lid screws on, and then the lid has a vacuum portion to it. Yeah. So you can unscrew the vacuum portion of it, so that the screen is what you see, and the bees will be sticking to that screen. Now, we had one where it ran out of batteries. Yeah. And I was bringing the bees home, and I don't have a plug-in in my car, and I didn't have a way to power it. And so basically I blasted air conditioning through that vent, through that screen until I got home, and then dumped them into a hive. And I had basically no die from that. They all survived. So you can do stuff like that if you're comfortable having a bucket of bees in the seat next to you in the passenger side. They don't get out of it. So
in the world of knockoff power tool batteries that exist today. Yeah. There's a number of mounts for those now. I'm surprised that the maker hasn't moved to providing a connection for you to use one of the major tool brands, whether Milwaukee or DeWalt, and then you can just click on
reach out to them and say, hey, we would love to see a Ryobi, DeWalt, whatever.
Yeah, it's attachment. It's a DeWalt Milwaukee. Now, technically, it's just, if you look at the power adapter brick, it's just 12 volts. So we could get a 12-volt clip-on for the top of a battery and just a short wire piece, and then Velcro the battery pack on top of the thing, and you basically power it off of a battery pack, and we could engineer a solution that way. But
Yeah.
it's one of those things where it's already a portable rechargeable deal, and it seems like more than once we've had it run out on the job. In fact, we may not have had it recharged as much as we thought it was recharged, and we only got like 10 minutes into the cutout and it died. And then
we used a generator for it.
We got to test the fact that my F-150 has an actual plug outlet on it, and ran an extension cord, but only because you had an extension cord with you.
Yep. Which is something else you should bring to a job site. Like that's.
I mean, all the tools I'm bringing these days are battery powered. So it's lucky that he's got, and I think that's from when you set up a camera.
Yeah.
Set up the GoPro and want to keep it on the battery charger.
Yep.
So you're going to have quite a few hand tools, pry bars, flat bars, hammers. You need a number of different flashlight attachment options. The spaces that the bees are in are generally not cavernous overhead locations. These are usually nooks and crannies.
Yeah.
And you're going to need to have to get
a pain.
Yep. And so having big floodlights isn't great because you can't get them up into the cavity that you need to see in order to get all the comb. Like comb's pretty easy to see because it's usually white, but the bees, once they get off the comb and want to cluster up in a corner, you need to get those backed up and out of there.
Right.
So being able to see those. You also have invested in a FLIR camera.
I do. This is my second one actually, because the one previous actually plugged into the bottom of my phone, and its life was not great when you charged it up. It was okay. It did fine for what it was.
Yeah, but you weren't using it all that much.
No,
But the point is you've moved away from that phone, and it's the old iPhone with the lightning port, and so you can't really move that to the new USB-C one.
Yep. So the FLIR one is the one I bought, which is Bluetooth connection.
And those, a FLIR camera, a FLIR attachment, they used to be like between, $400 and $800, and I was really surprised to hear how affordable they were today.
Yeah.
But the point is, it's still another piece of equipment, right? We're upwards of, my scaffold sections are $300 each if you're buying them new. I think I bought mine off of Craigslist/Marketplace.
Yeah.
So I'm getting some of my stuff. That stuff works really well off of those types of plates because condition is condition. So if you're buying the stuff new, you're $1,000, $1,200, $2,000 in on equipment. I also have the endoscope camera it's this little cheapie that I bought off of Amazon, right? So that's good because on your pre-trip, you want to be able to see where they actually are. So showing the homeowner, hey, there's a hot spot on the wall or in the ceiling. They think it's going to be in the wall. They just want you to cut the wall out. The reality is it's in the ceiling, and I got to cut into the ceiling, and that's an entirely different game because now you got to match the plaster of the ceiling instead of the flat wall, and that can be a challenge for the homeowner to explain that you have to do that. We've gone through the floor in a farmhouse.
Yeah.
We've done the 2-story thing on the front of an apartment complex. We thought was going to be just a few feet off the ground in a garage. Turned out to be like 8 feet off the ground in the front of a house that was on a hillside.
Yeah.
And had poor access because of landscaping. So I couldn't get a 5-foot construction scaffolding in there because there was a giant bush in the way. Yeah. That site you couldn't get a lift into unless you wanted to park it on the street, and you're looking at like a 60 or 70 foot lift to reach all the way across the slope front yard. So, I mean, you see Randy online on YouTube, a lot of those 2-story cutouts, he's charging a lift to the job because he doesn't want to deal with scaffold. That's certainly another way you can do it, but only if you've got access, right? Like the apartment complexes we did, they had pretty good access on the last 2 we did, but the one that we did earlier this summer, it was down a ravine at the back of an apartment complex on a cross-sloped hill on the back of a hill. So there was no flat space. Not only could you not get a lift in there, you couldn't get a lift stabilized back there because it was a 10-foot drop off. It was like almost a 30 or 40 degree slope back there.
Yeah. So a lot of these are precarious. I would say precarious ground that the bees have decided to live in. Now, every once in a while, we'll get ones that are 6 feet off the ground.
I mean, we had one in a garage that was crappy masonite siding. They didn't care about it. You just pull it off by your hand, and it was stand there in the ground and suck them out of the wall. But that's one out of the dozen we've done, right?
Yeah, more than 20 now, I think. But yeah. So this process. So usually what happens is that you get a panicked owner of some sort, right? That's how this all starts. They call me, and I get to talk to them. And then we usually have to set up going out. So if you decide to do this, 100% go out to the site. Because I would say, especially right now, it's October, this time of year, I would say 75% of the calls I get are yellow jackets or bald-faced hornets. In fact, I've had 3 of those this week, bald-faced hornets calls. So you go out to the site. If you can just get them to send you pictures, send pictures. Usually the pictures are out of focus, not any good. You go out to the site. We charge now for going out to sites because so many of them are fake. Then we get there, and I'll take pictures as best as I can, and as well as use my FLIR to see where the hive is. Sometimes you can't see it. And I'll talk it over with Steve, and sometimes Steve will go out by himself after that. Like the apartment complex, Steve went out. It was pretty close to your house too.
It was, but you didn't have a ladder with you, and it was the hive was at the second story.
Yeah,
they transition.
Now, when I talked to them on the phone, they promised that was on the first story.
Right.
So you're going to get false information often, which is also why you need to go out there. So we go out there. Steve also went out there, took a look at it. Yep, it's bees, and they'd been poisoned. They'd been dusted. Right. So that means if they've been dusted or poisoned or however they tried, like they called an exterminator, that honey's no good. So usually our cost goes up because the bees may not survive and the honey's no good. We can't do anything with the honey anyway. And it was really interesting on that first cutout that we did for the apartment complex. They'd been dusted. I actually caught the queen off of the comb. I was really excited. I set her down on a brick.
You put her in a queen clip.
Queen clip. Cut her in a queen clip. Put her on a brick to my left because you have no area to work in, and then continued doing the cutout. I picked her up maybe 5 minutes later, 10 minutes later, and she was dead.
Well, along with the 3 or 4 attendants that had crawled inside the queen clip to attend to her.
They were all like she was slowly moving.
They were all very slowly, lethargically moving.
But they were dead, right? So again, if they've been poisoned, you got to be really careful about what you're working with. So then you go through. We start vacuuming. Usually, you start after the cut. You usually make a cut into the.
I usually
structure.
Do the opens because I have a better sense of the construction techniques. How is the fascia attached? What's the joist layout overhead? Do I want to cut, this way on the ceiling or that way? Because you kind of want to be parallel with the joist, not perpendicular. And my goal is to cut one hole that's big enough for us to work in and not any bigger than it has to be, and not have to recut a second hole because if I have to cut a 2-inch extra section to make the hole a little bigger, then that's just even more difficult to if I can get out one piece of drywall, you can basically repatch that one piece of drywall in. You start cutting out a bunch of little pieces and it's impossible to repatch with what you took out.
Yeah. And you do a good job of giving them something to screw into when they're repatching that too.
Yeah, because you kind of want to close up the hole because there'll be a couple of, there'll be invariably there's some flyers still left around and they don't want them in their house. That's the other thing. I scrounged up some internal drop sheet expansion towers that are used in. I always saw them used in commercial applications where they were where you had to do your remodels while a business was open, and this allows you to. It's sort of an extended pole that goes between the ceiling and the ground. That allows you to make a corner and trap plastic, and then you tape it to the ceiling and drapes to the floor, and you can make a square off a little cubicle around an area, which is nice if you're in a giant living room of some $1 million house that you got to do a bee cutout on. You don't want bees,
plaster, bees, honey, everything else
all over the house, tracking it all through the house. So that's another add that to the group of tools for if you're doing cutout. Like, it's great if you want to do just the outside ones, but what happens when that's not an option? You know, you got a brick house, you got a stone house, and you're going to go through the drywall inside. You know, you got to have all the tools in the toolbox. You just can't get by with just some of it. And we've also had the tree cutouts. So let's not forget those, where you got to be handy. You got to be willing to run a chainsaw.
Yeah.
Because it turns out that the tree guy doesn't want to mess with the bees, and you're a bee guy, you're probably not a tree guy. So it helps to be like, I'm comfortable with a chainsaw. And
I have a little battery operated Ryobi that does a decent job
for stuff up to about a 12-inch, but
yeah.
we've harvested several trunk sections
Yeah.
out of trees, and that can be a challenge if you're not comfortable running a chainsaw and being asked to do a cutout out of a down tree.
Yeah.
You're probably going to need to be able to run a chainsaw in order to cut the log out to get to the bees, but so you can get the bees out of there so the tree guy can finish cleaning up the tree.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of it's not just handling bees that's involved in these cutouts, that in terms of skills that you need to have in your toolbox. So we've talked about our equipment. We've talked about having to interact with all of our customers and the follow-up.
The process too. So the end of the process. So you have to cut the comb out. You're usually vacuuming off the comb as you do it, and that's usually when you get stung. We have multiple buckets.
The typical layout of hives in a natural environment is you'll find the honey toward the outside edges.
Yep.
And since you are going in from what is typically the outside, whether that be the ceiling or the physical outside of the structure, typically what you run into first is honey.
Yeah.
So you have a tendency to work with honey first to get that out of the way.
Or abandoned comb. Like the other one
Yeah.
we see is like abandoned comb that they just they expanded to at some point, or it was a replacement hive. So it's just nothing, empty comb.
Yep.
Dry and kind of crunchy.
And so you kind of want to get all of that removed and out of your way. I like to try to stay pretty clean with myself, try to keep the sticky off my tools, off my hands.
Yeah, I don't really care.
He doesn't really care. Kind of drives me nuts. Whenever I take over for him, I'm asking for our water bucket and a wet rag, and I'm policing up my tools. And
Yeah.
again, I just feel like I can do a better job manipulating my tools if I'm not, you're focused on, like, if you've done honey extraction, maybe you've got some on it, and everybody thinks honey is sticky. But the reality is, if you get more than just a couple of drips on stuff, it's actually slimy, right? And the stuff feels slimy.
It's slick.
And
if you're standing on it, it's slick.
It gets slick, and then you start tracking that everywhere, and so.
Now, to be fair, it's usually on my hands. I don't usually track it
yeah.
everywhere. It's just usually my gloves are usually coated in honey, because usually Steve will do the cutout, right? And by the time I'm in there tagging out, I'm grabbing honey, and at that point,
like I said, I usually start with an open.
Yep.
I typically get stung the most on an open, because that's when the guard bees are going to associate you with disturbing the hive.
Yep.
And then you start doing some vacuuming and cutting out, and then typically, after 15, 20 minutes, a half hour, usually we tag out, give the guy on the ladder a break, and come down and get some water.
We haven't really talked about. It's physically taxing to do this. It's working overhead.
Yeah, it's almost always overhead, especially if it's in a ceiling.
And you're moving out honey. So we talked about some of the cutouts we did. We moved out, a 5-gallon bucket of honey.
Oh, yeah.
So you're talking about 50 pounds of honey that
Yep.
you're pulling down from this location, and it gets tiring. And if you're in the sun and it's 90 degrees, or if it's 80 degrees, it's hot as heck, and you're wearing a bee suit because you don't want to get stung in the face.
They get testy,
Yeah.
and then you have all the aspects of a construction project combined with still having to do proper beekeeping, right? You still want to be, calm and controlled movements. You start reaching in there and start grabbing combs. Like, you can only see one side of the comb. You can only vac one side of the comb.
Yeah.
And so you've got to reach up there and grasp a piece of comb, which means you've got to have fingers on the back side. Well, you didn't get a chance to vac that off.
Yeah.
So you just start up there, reaching up there and grabbing stuff, you're going to get stung, guaranteed.
And you're cutting, we have a serrated knife that has some bend to it that we're using to cut the comb off. So the comb doesn't neatly come off and wait for you to cut all the way across it to suddenly come loose. You can be halfway across a piece of comb, especially if it's honey laden, and it'll break free. And then you've got angry bees, and you're trying to catch it before it falls
down the wall
or 15 feet to the ground and smushes on the ground. So
because you don't know what the structural, like brand new white comb, it's super soft. Like you can't squeeze it in your fingers hard enough to hold it, because it just sort of like compresses in your fingers, and so you can't grab onto it to hold it secure enough because it's so soft. But at the same time, it's full of fresh nectar and bee brood, so it's got some weight to it. So it's this weird combination of like structurally insufficient to hold, but yet it's still existing in the real world kind of thing.
Yeah.
And so then it just sort of melts into your hand that you're trying to catch and like hand off to your partner on the ground. You're like, good luck with that.
Yeah. And then so the partner on the ground, which is often what I start with. So I'm going through and rubber banding. So I get frames. Steve does a pretty good job of holding it. Usually empty frame up there, and you hold it up, and then you.
So if you got brood, you want to save open brood.
Open brood you save. We have a bucket. We have a bucket for trash, which is just empty brood, empty wax that has probably not been used. We have a bucket for honey, and then we have a bucket for brood. Well, not usually bucket, but
we're going to frame up stuff we want to save. So that's typically pollen frames and brood. We don't try to frame up honey because it's too heavy to get framed up and hold in a frame.
We'll do a little bit of honey, but it's just too heavy. And so then you have to cut the wax to the frame size to put in a frame. And because there's often honey at the top of the frame, the brood usually will be like in the middle of the frame. So you're cutting out weird shapes.
Yeah.
And then we use rubber bands. I've tried rubber bands. I've tried
string
and
yarn.
Yarn worked okay, but it requires a stapler, and rubber bands are just easy.
Yep.
So you rubber band it in, you put it in a box, and then you're going to take that back and you're going to throw your bees on top of that.
So the method that we found works the best for us is the guy who's doing the cutout. He'll vacuum what he can to get a pretty clean one side, and then cut out a chunk and hand that down to your partner. Usually at that point, your partner's does a pretty good look over on the backside to see if the queen's there, and then that person will take the vac and suck off the backside of the comb, and then move over to a secondary workstation that we have set up in order to lay that out and either recut it to size if it's not perfect, or get it physically mounted in the frame and rubber banded up, and that break will give the guy upstairs a chance to reposition, see what's behind the piece of comb they just took out, wash their hands off, take a drink, whatever. It's a short respite for the guy up on top of the ladder.
Yeah. So overall, I know what my thought is, but what would your thought be of, I'm a beekeeper, I've had less than 2 years, I want to do a cutout?
Hopefully you're doing it with somebody who's got some more experience and done one before, and not going into a blind.
Yeah. And so I would say if 2 year, now we've had, I think he was a 2-year beekeeper come with us.
Yep.
And he
noped out about an hour in.
About an hour in. And this usually,
after he got stung about the third time.
Yeah. And this usually lasts 4 to 6 hours. We can usually be done.
So the apartment complex cutouts were a pretty good sized hives. They're probably about as big as a normal hive would get in a house before. Like if the structure is being actively lived in, they have to ignore the problem for like 6 to 8 months to a year for the hive to get as big as it's going to get. Rarely does it go multiple years. Unless it's just the access is the backside of a barn on a farm or something. They're like, oh, yeah, the bees are there. We don't care, right?
Right.
But in this case, that was probably a good year that the bees had to fill the space of a 2x10 floor joist space and soffit, and it was about 20 frames, and they were diagonally they were sort of at a 30-degree angle to the joist space, so they were about 20 to 22 inches in length. So if you looked at it, if you did a rough surface area calc, it would be the equivalent of 2 double deeps.
Yeah.
Right, or a double deep.
A double
right?
deep.
So 20 frames, which is about what we run our hives in. So it's sort of the natural size of what you always considered a Langstroth hive to be, and then sort of bonus comb would be spread out in various areas on the edges for honey storage. We certainly have seen that in the past.
Yeah. So I would say also as part of that, we take maybe six to 8 frames of brood out of those usually.
Yeah.
If it's
a healthy hive.
6 to 8 frames of brood.
And that size cutout between when we roll up on site, get set up, get the structure opened up, start removing comb, and get everything cleaned up at the end, and our scaffold broke down, we can typically get out of there in 4 hours. We mostly bid our jobs on 4 hour, expecting to be there 4 hours.
Right.
Now, there have been a couple of those where the temperature gets hotter, you move slower because you get wore out quicker. It was a big hive. It was bigger than what we expected. It was like 4 buckets worth of comb and a bucket and a full 10 frames of rubber banded material.
Brood. Yep.
Brood. We were a second piece of scaffolding tall, which we weren't anticipating. I had thrown it in because it was just in my scaffold section, and I think we were 6 hours before we pulled out of that site.
Yeah.
But our basic bid is $400 for a 4-hour removal, and typically after that it's $100. Basically, what we're basing that on is $100 an hour.
Yep.
For 2 guys to do this job.
Now, each scaffold level, because I don't like being on scaffold, I charge more. If you've poisoned them, it's an additional fee, because you're not getting bees. You're not likely to get bees. You're not going to get honey. The honey that you're going to have, you can't eat anyway.
I mean, you're potentially dealing with a lot. Like one hive we cut out, they had almost been abandoned for weeks or months, and it was super hard. And like if you've worked high comb in your hive and you go to cut it and it's sort of this soft, sort of candy bar-ish consistency, that's one thing. If you have to saw through hard, dried wax combs, like it took an impressive amount of effort on overhead to saw through, thick, dried out comb to get it cut off of the structure. And it was significant work to do that because the hive had been sprayed and then the bees either died off or abandoned the comb and left it there.
Yeah.
So that, again, that's all trash for us. And then sort of the worst of the worst is if you're there a short 2 weeks after they've sprayed, and the reason why they've called you out is now there's like the drywall is wet and gooey and dripping because all of the honey has started to come out of the cells as the small hive beetles have come in and slimed it all, and the roaches have come in to eat the honey and the dead bees.
And the wax moths have
and
built
the wax
up all
moth,
the wax.
and now you're dealing with all of that garbage on top doing like all of the regular beekeeping stuff too,
Yes.
right? So that's the bigger mess, the more you pay.
Yeah, and again, right, some of this you'll bid, and then you get into it, and after you get into it, you recognize these issues are up, and you can go back to them and say, hey, it looks like you've sprayed this. Have you actually sprayed this? And at that point, they'll usually tell you, yeah, we used this on them, or we called somebody out and they did this.
Or you look around the vicinity of the garage that you're in, and there's suspicious 2 newish cans of Raid that you kick over, and they're hollowy, clink across the floor, and you're like, how those look like 2 empty Raid cans. When did those get there? Oh, we bought those. Oh yeah, no, we used those.
Yeah.
You use them on the hive? Oh, yeah. I'm like, so you did spray them?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. I guess I did.
Yes.
That we've certainly had that conversation too.
Yeah. And again, right? They're charging. I think one of the guys actually was a plumber that we worked on one, and he called it redemption, cost savings, cost something.
Yeah.
And he was talking about the honey. Our honey is part of what we get, right? Because I resell honey, especially I can sell cut comb at $20, $25 a pound. So when you pull out a 5-gallon bucket of cut comb, that can be a lot of money. Now you won't get all of it to a usable manner, but you still get some of it out there.
But, and so, I think we've touched briefly on it before in our other previous times we've talked about this, but really, if you're going into this and you're having people balk at that price, that's what it is for our area. If you're living in a Seattle or a San Francisco or something where your cost of living is twice as much, adjust as needed. But the reality is you should be pricing this in line with what other professional services are charging for educated professional services. And what do I mean by that? If you're an electrician, if you're a plumber, right, you're a guy that goes out to fix your roof, any of these sort of, especially if you're licensed, a licensed tradesman that's going to come out and work on your home and do a service for you. It's an HVAC guy. When was the last time you get an HVAC guy out to your house for less than $100 an hour, right? It's probably not going to happen. So this is a specialized trade that has specialized tools that require specialized training. Tell me that does not sound like an electrician, a plumber, an HVAC guy, right?
Well, and what's interesting, you bring that up. So the lady that I saw today that was sure that she had honeybees that ended up being yellow jackets, she couldn't get anybody to come out.
Yeah.
So she had contacted both clubs, evidently, is what she told me. Both clubs, and called multiple people, and people won't do it. So it is a very specialized, very specific trade and skill. And realistically, it's Steve and I do it mostly because it's kind of, in my point of view, this is my opinion, is that it's me hanging out with Steve, and we're both doing bee stuff, and we're both good at it, and it kind of feels good to get, I get some time with Steve and get to laugh at him being stung.
Yeah,
right?
You can hang out with your beekeeping buddy and do a project. It's a standard guy thing to have bonding time over a project.
Yeah.
And a lot of guys will go fishing, or they'll work in a garage in over a car, or go to the tractor or something together, go golfing together. Ours just seems to be more masochistic, I guess.
I guess. But we get paid for it. So
that's the other thing. Was we get, but it also gives us an opportunity to talk about bees. Almost all the homeowners, the number of passerbys and the people at the apartment complex that are super interested in what's going on.
Oh yeah, you get people they're off on a walk and stop and take the picture from across the street, and you can call them closer if the bees are being nice.
So if you're looking to go part-time, or you're looking for more sales for your hobby honey, or your hobby wax, or your hobby beekeeping, and you want to do more community engagement with that, it's an opportunity to have an extension of that, because you're going to have interactions with the public for sure.
Yeah. And if you don't, and you hear about somebody that needs a cutout, you can always point them to us. So,
well, if you're in the
Central Illinois,
I had a friend. It was actually Randy reached out and wanted to know how far I was from Chicago, because somebody had called him from Chicago, and I guess wanted to ask if he knew anybody in the area that would come do a cutout for them. And
I would have gone to Chicago.
Well, I mean, I'll let him know.
All right.
I didn't think we were up for traveling to Chicago for cutouts. Well,
I mean,
like that market has probably already got people.
That market certainly has people that'll do it. They'd have to pay for our travel, but we could probably. It just depends. If Randy was going to be there and do it with us,
sure. we gotta set up a time. I think we're gonna try to get Randy on the podcast, and then we gotta try to set up some.
We have a couple people that we've got that I'd like to get on the podcast. I have a list that I'm working on the list I have not.
Special guests over winter when
Special
beekeeping
guests.
is a little duller around the yard.
It's a little bit duller, yeah. I've been actually, that's the other thing I've been doing is I've been watching, I'm a member of the Michigan Beekeeping Association, but it's the Michigan Organic Beekeeping. It's they don't believe in treatment, mite treatment.
Interesting.
So I'm part of that organization. They do a really good job of bringing guest speakers in. So
Yeah.
I've been going through. I went to the last year's beekeeping, the North America Honey Bee Expo.
Yep.
And I have all of those videos that I go through and look at those. I watch those every once in a while. So I encourage all of our listeners. It really opens. There's a lot of research that's being done that we just don't have access to. We don't even know what's happening.
Yep.
So, take a minute, listen to those things too, watch those things, even if it's just playing in the background while you're making dinner or something. Some of it's bound to soak in.
And that was why we wanted to have sort of an in the news segment for this podcast is, to try to keep, if we came across stuff that we thought was interesting and need to share with the beekeeping community, it gives us an opportunity to do that. So if you find anything that you think is newsworthy and wants to share, let us know. Drop us a line.
Yep.
We have a website, and I don't know that we have our email set up to go through the website. Otherwise, we have our other contact methods.
Yeah, beekeepingbuddies@gmail.com. That's always in our link in our podcasts. And we have YouTube that you can watch some of our stuff. We'll throw a video up there once in a while if we've done something exciting.
Maybe some product reviews.
Yep.
We've had a couple of those.
We've had a couple of product reviews. And so, yeah, we're happy to talk to anybody and everybody. So we appreciate you guys listening and reaching out to us.
And that'll wrap up this episode of Beekeeping Buddies. We thank you for listening. Have a good one.